In early 2024, news broke that Marco Raduano, the mafia boss on the run, had been captured on an island in France. This mafia boss stunned the nation when he managed to escape from a so-called high-security prison using bedsheets. He was on the run for roughly a year before investigators narrowed down on him. Until his escape, Marco Raduano wasn't one of the most famous mafia figures. He was the leader of Sacra Corona Unita, better known as Italy's Fourth Mafia. This crime syndicate was long ignored, but Marco Raduano's escape was an eye-opener on just how powerful this mafia really was. In today's video, we're going to explore Marco Raduano's infamous escape and the investigation that brought him back to prison. We'll also delve into the violent and shocking underworld of the Fourth Mafia. Stay tuned to discover why they are currently one of Italy's biggest threats. In 2017, Marco Raduano was sentenced to 24 years in prison. An anti-mafia investigation uncovered that he was running a mafia clan in Foggia, otherwise known as the Fourth Mafia. This ruthless mafia boss had a long list of crimes he was guilty of, including drug trafficking, illegal weapons, extortion, and murder. He was a brutal and violent killer. Allegedly, he organized groups to carry out kills. One of the most infamous kills that this mafia boss instigated was the murder of rival mobster Omar Trot, who was killed at a bruschetta bar in Vieste in 2017. Marco was serving 24 years at a high-security prison in Nuoro, Sardinia. In February 2023, this mafia boss made a daring escape. Security footage shows him escaping over the prison walls using bedsheets. He had several bedsheets tied together to construct a makeshift rope. He climbed up the rope, over the wall, then made his jump. Footage shows him getting up and running off into the distance, opening up an insane investigation. One of the things that immediately caught people's attention about the footage was how easily he escaped. It took him a total of 16 seconds to get free. There were no security guards in sight, allowing him to get away without a chase. This sparked an internal investigation in the high-security prison. Did the mafia boss have influence over the guards, or were the facility security measures just not strong enough? Now, Marco Raduano is a cunning criminal. He didn't get as far as he did by acting sporadically. A plan must have been in place, but to this day, it's still a mafia secret. But one thing that is interesting about this escape was that Marco wasn't the only Fourth Mafia member who had escaped their sentence. His right-hand man, underboss Gianluigi Troiano, was on the run as well. He was serving his time through house arrest but escaped in 2021 after dismantling his bracelet. With both criminals on the run, this showed Italian investigators just how much was going on under their radar. If they really wanted to put an end to mafia crimes, it was time to step up their efforts. Undoubtedly, this prison escape was embarrassing for Italian authorities, especially once they connected the dots and discovered Marco Raduano's connection to fugitive Gianluigi Troiano. How did they let this happen? Of course, this was an eye-opener on how much power the Fourth Mafia really had. Italian authorities were going to have to take their efforts to the next level if they wanted to find these men. What they did know about Marco Raduano was that he was a ruthless and violent criminal, and they believed that his freedom was a threat to the public. This led to him being listed on Europol's 10 most dangerous fugitives. Marco Raduano was a lot more connected than investigators realized. This helped him stay out of the public eye while he was on the run. As authorities focused on their investigation, they realized that they were going to need international help. After all, this fugitive could be anywhere. This investigation may have started off as an embarrassment for Italian investigators, but they put that aside and focused on what mattered. After roughly a year, their efforts paid off. With the help of the French gendarmerie, they were able to catch Marco Raduano. He was found on a French island called Corsica. He had been living a frugal lifestyle using fake identification. One night, he decided to accompany a young lady out for dinner, where authorities were able to detain him. This wasn't the end of their streak of good luck. They also caught his right-hand man, Gianluigi Troiano, picking up a parcel in Granada, Spain. This joint operation was a success, but it opened up a new door for Italian investigators and the District Anti-Mafia Directorate. As they were putting focus on the larger and more well-known organized crime syndicates, the Fourth Mafia's operations slid right past them. Marco Raduano's prison escape didn't just make local news. This was a prison break that caught the world's attention. How did he orchestrate the escape and go unnoticed? Not only did this escape draw attention to the Fourth Mafia, but there were also implications for the lack of security in the prison and effort from investigators. One of the biggest eye-openers was the lack of security at what was supposed to be a high-security prison. There were many cracks in the system that needed to be looked at if it was that easy for an inmate to escape. But it also highlighted the impact and influence of organized crime. This escape did have people looking at the inside. Was the mob boss able to pull strings on the inside? Were the guards threatened or paid off? We've covered many stories of mafia figures in the past who were able to intimidate witnesses, authorities, and prosecutors to avoid prison time. Is it possible that Marco could have pulled off something similar to make his daring but otherwise easy escape? In this case, both Marco Raduano and Gianluigi Troiano were higher-ups in the crime syndicate. Authorities were focused on the power and influence that these two had. But with all their focus on the big guys, the lesser-known players in the crime syndicate were calling shots and making power moves. If Italian investigators intend to bring down the Fourth Mafia, they will need to figure out who the key players and associates are. Mistakes were made, flaws were exposed, but it also served as a lesson learned. The Mafia in Italy is far from over. This pivotal moment showed how law enforcement needs to rework its strategies. It also pointed them toward the lesser-known but increasingly powerful Fourth Mafia. How big has this small organization really grown? Sacra Corona Unita, aka the Fourth Mafia, is the youngest mafia group in Italy. While many organized crime groups date back to the early 1900s, this group didn't form until the early 1980s. The group's founder, Pino Rugoli, was serving a sentence in prison for bank robbery when this group was formed. When this clan first rose, authorities ignored it. At the time, there were bigger fish to fry like 'Ndrangheta and Cosa Nostra. The Fourth Mafia was involved in violent crimes, but they were written off as feuds between farmers, not actually gang activity. This dismissal allowed the group to grow their criminal organizations. Without any attention to their activities, the group was able to pull off armed robberies, auto theft, drug trafficking, extortion, and many other crimes. They are also a very aggressive group. Today, violence in the Mafia is nowhere near the level it used to be. Back in the day, Mafia men would resort to intimidation tactics, torture, and even murder to get their business done. These days, the big players rarely use violence because it draws too much attention. If they kill a rival, an investigation starts and it draws a lot of media focus. To avoid this, Mafia leaders are more creative and subtle about how they get their money. Sure, people still get beat up if they owe a mob boss money, but leaders will find other ways to make people pay before they do something drastic that will draw attention to their operations. Now, the Fourth Mafia has been ignored by authorities since the beginning. In a way, this gave them a pass to resort to violence. After all, nobody was on their trail. Who was going to point fingers their way? Their violent reign over Foggia makes them one of the most feared and dangerous criminal groups currently operating in Italy. One thing that's been noted about this crime group is that it's very easy for them to hide things, especially because people are afraid to speak up. This group has been terrorizing the population for decades, but one of the main reasons why they get away with it is the silence. Civilians are afraid to speak up because they don't know what type of retaliation they will face. The Fourth Mafia has a shoot first, ask questions later way of business. What's really scary for the public of Foggia is how often disputes arise from different divisions of this mafia. These disputes have often resulted in farmers and business owners having property stolen and destroyed. There has also been a rise of baby gangs, with minors pulling off gang-related activities. A 17-year-old member, whose name has not been publicly released, shot and killed 21-year-old Nicola Di Rienzo and left him for dead in the park. Allegedly, nobody spoke up about this shooting because they were afraid. These baby gangs are a huge threat to the public and have been responsible for several recent murders. Underage members are often recruited from poor neighborhoods and are easy for the gang to manipulate into doing their dirty work. As authorities place focus on the Fourth Mafia, it shows that they have been getting away with violent crimes for many years. Little has been brought to investigators' attention. Occasionally, a missing person or a stolen vehicle would shift attention their way, but not enough evidence to build a case. This all goes back to nobody speaking up. Back in 2017, the Fourth Mafia committed an act that finally put them on police officers' radars. The Mafia group has a long history with extortion. Since they aren't afraid to use dirty tactics to get money, they will get violent to bring in the cash. But this time, they messed with someone who wasn't afraid to speak up. Lazzaro Dario was a landowner and farmer who caught the Mafia's attention. They wanted to extort him and had tried several times in the past. He had received many threats from this violent clan, including threats of destroying his property and stealing crops, but the extortion attempt went too far. A dozen members showed up on his property with a gun, demanding 150,000 euros to be paid annually. Out of fear for his life, the farmer agreed. But he had no plans of paying this clan any money. Instead, he went directly to the police. This farmer did something that people have been afraid to do for the past 30 years. He spoke up. Authorities have tried to convince the public that more people need to speak up. When the crimes are brought forward, they can use the evidence and witnesses to build a case. If the victims stay silent, the clan's power will continue to grow. But it seems like people are too afraid to follow in the farmer's footsteps. While the farmer did make a risky move by speaking up, it's important to know that he's now living safely under police protection. So this brings up the question of, is it too late for anti-mafia efforts to stop this organized crime syndicate? Locals still remember back in 1992 when a builder, Giovanni Pannunzio, was shot to death after denouncing the mafia. While this was over 30 years ago, people are still afraid to meet the same fate. At this point in time, the criminal underworld has a very strong hold on the province. Many people believe that the mob has become too aggressive and has too much power through extortion and other activities to see an end in near sight. But recent efforts and international cooperation have shown that even the most powerful players can be brought to justice. The captures of Marco Raduano and Gianluigi Troiano have given people hope. Other Italian mafia bosses like Roberto Senesi and Rocco Moretti have been detained over the past few years. This shows that there is a greater possibility of taking away the Fourth Mafia's power. This wraps up our story on Marco Raduano and his infamous prison escape. While many people weren't aware of who this mafia boss was before the escape, his story opened up a door that shook the world. Marco may have been the boss of the least-known Italian mafia group, but it turns out they are one of the most powerful and dangerous operating in the country. All of this was frightening because it was happening under the police's nose. When Marco Raduano was arrested, he was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Now, it's unknown if he was able to pull some strings on the inside to sneak off without a single security guard knowing, or if he was just that brilliant of a criminal mastermind to pull it off. Either way, this Italian mafia boss escaped from a high-security prison using bedsheets to scale the wall. A quick climb, jump, and run, and he was off within seconds. He was immediately placed on Europol's most dangerous fugitive list, and the manhunt began. A year later, authorities found him dining at a restaurant on a French island. As Italian police officers focused on the Marco Raduano case, it opened up doors to a powerful criminal underworld that they had ignored. The Fourth Mafia is Italy's youngest and smallest mafia, but they are also the most powerful. This group is known to use violent tactics similar to mafias of the past. Extortion and murder are just part of the game to these mobsters. While authorities were ignoring them, they were able to extend their influence, leaving a trail of bodies along the way. We hope you enjoyed this story on Marco Raduano's prison escape and how it drew attention to Italy's Fourth Mafia. It just goes to show how much criminal activity is happening right under law enforcement's noses. Before we go, we want to give a shout out to Le Monde, BBC, CNN, CBS News, National Post, and Barron's for sharing resources that helped us learn more about this case. This wraps up our story on Marco Raduano. Make sure you hit like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more Mafia Mystique content.